It was a typical Friday night after my college classes, and I was working my usual gig as a DoorDash driver. I often did deliveries on weekends to cover my living expenses, but something about that night felt off, like an eerie sense of wrongness lingering in the air. The orders were slow, and the ones coming in weren't worth the time. Low pay, long distances, just a complete waste. Then, after nearly an hour of nothing, a better-paying order popped up. The only catch? It was 8 miles away, leading me far from the city limits into a more isolated area. I hesitated for a moment. The location seemed unusual, but it was still better than the worthless orders I had been getting. Without thinking much, I accepted it, drove to the restaurant, grabbed the bag, and started my trip. The GPS estimated about 30 minutes, longer than my usual runs. As I left campus behind, houses became scarce. Eventually, I was surrounded by nothing but endless fields, stretching under the dim moonlight. I kept glancing at the GPS, double-checking the route. There were no houses nearby, just empty land, swaying crops, and an unsettling quiet that gnawed at me. Then, after 20 minutes of driving through what felt like the middle of nowhere, I finally spotted a house. It stood alone among the fields, the only structure in sight, matching the pinned location on my app. My stomach churned as I drove down the dirt path leading up to it. There was something unnatural about its isolation, something unsettling about the silence pressing in around me. As I approached, I noticed that the house was eerily dark except for a single porch light glowing dimly. No other lights inside, no sounds, just stillness. My nerves spiked, but I shook it off. It was probably just an old house where someone preferred dim lighting. I pulled up, parked, grabbed the delivery bag, and stepped onto the porch. The wooden planks creaked under my weight. I knocked firmly on the door and waited. No response. I turned and glanced back at my car, now looking like a distant shadow swallowed by the darkened field. The sheer emptiness around me made my chest tighten. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. No movement inside, no sounds, not even the faintest sign of life. That's when I noticed something chilling. The house's windows were old and decayed, their wooden frames splintered and rotting. This place didn't look like it had been lived in for years, and yet my delivery app had brought me here. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. Then I looked up at the porch light and realized it wasn't a regular light at all. It was one of those automatic solar-powered lights that charge during the day and turn on at night, meaning no one had to be here to turn it on. Just as that thought clicked in my mind, I heard it, a low rumbling sound from behind me. I turned my head sharply and saw headlights cutting through the darkness. A car was approaching, slowly, kicking up dust as it crawled down the dirt road toward my parked vehicle. I froze, watching as it came to a halt just behind my car. The engine idled for a moment before the driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out, tall, broad, standing motionless in the dim light, his face obscured by shadows. I swallowed hard and called out, "Hey, did you order this?" No response. He just stood there, silent, unmoving. A cold, creeping fear slithered up my spine. Something in my gut screamed at me to run. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. That was all I needed. The delivery bag slipped from my hands as I bolted, leaping off the porch and sprinting toward the fields. I didn't care where I was running. I just needed to get away. Behind me, I heard footsteps pounding against the dirt. He was chasing me. Adrenaline surged through my veins, my breaths coming in ragged gasps as I pushed myself forward. The tall grass scratched at my legs, but I didn't dare slow down. My only focus was putting as much distance between us as possible. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of his footsteps began to fade. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was still there, standing at the edge of the field, watching me. Then he turned and walked back toward my car, heart hammering. I crouched low in the grass, waiting, barely breathing. I couldn't move. I couldn't make a sound. I had no idea what he was planning, but I wasn't about to take any chances. Minutes passed like hours before I finally heard his car door slam shut. Then the headlights flicked on, and the vehicle slowly reversed back onto the road, disappearing into the night. I stayed hidden for a long time, making absolutely sure he was gone before I stumbled my way back to the nearest road. My legs ached, My lungs burned and my hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called the police. By the time they arrived, the man was long gone. My car was still there, untouched. Even the food delivery bag remained on the porch. Whoever he was, he hadn't wanted my money. He hadn't wanted my car. He had wanted me. Even now, I still don't know what his true intentions were that night, but I know one thing for certain. If I hadn't run when I did, I probably wouldn't be here to tell this story. I was on my way to college, my SUV packed with all my belongings. It wasn't just my first long road trip, it was also the first time I'd be away from my family for such a long period. My destination was nearly 600 miles away, and I had divided the journey into 2 days of driving. According to my calculations, I'd reach my motel by 11 p.m. By 7 p.m., the sun had completely set, and the highway had become eerily empty. Occasionally, a car would pass, its headlights briefly illuminating the road before fading into the darkness. The monotonous drive was making me more exhausted by the minute. Around 10 p.m., I decided to stop at the next gas station before continuing my journey. About 10 minutes later, I pulled into a small, isolated gas station. It was in the middle of nowhere. No city, no houses, no visible signs of life, just a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. There were no other cars in sight, and not a single light flickered from any nearby buildings. As I stepped out to refuel my SUV, I felt a sudden chill. That's when I saw him. A man was walking toward me from the shadows. He was large, at least twice my size, and looked to be in his 50s. His ragged clothes and unkempt appearance suggested he might be homeless, but there was no one else around. His unsettling grin sent a wave of unease through me. "Do you need something?" I asked hesitantly, hoping he'd keep his distance. He stopped a few feet away from my car, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if checking for something or someone. Then in a low, urgent voice, he muttered, "Turn around. Get back on the highway." I blinked in confusion. "What?" He gestured toward the highway exit I had just taken and repeated, more forcefully this time, "Go back. Get out of here." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I stood there, unsure of what to do. He wanted me to go back the way I came, but that was a one-way exit ramp. Was he telling me to drive the wrong way back onto the highway? That didn't make any sense. I glanced toward the road ahead. There were no construction signs, no roadblocks, just an empty on-ramp leading further into the dark. Dismissing his cryptic warning, I finished fueling up, got back in my car, and started driving toward the highway entrance. That's when I noticed something strange. Every single streetlight on the ramp was off. A deep sense of unease settled in my gut, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a power outage. Still, I instinctively slowed down, keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. And then, out of nowhere, a pickup truck swerved in front of me, blocking my path. Every door flung open at once, and 4 men jumped out, each carrying something: a crowbar, a knife, something metallic that glinted under my headlights. Their faces were expressionless. They didn't wear masks. They didn't care if I saw them. They started running toward my car. My heart pounded as I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. More figures emerged from the shadows along the roadside, at least a dozen of them. Some even started chasing after me. I spun the wheel, barely managing to avoid crashing into the gas pumps as I sped away from that place as fast as I could. When I finally felt safe, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. But strangely, no one ever called me back. No follow-up, no report. It was as if the incident never happened. To this day, I still wonder, was that old man trying to save my life? And what would have happened if I had ignored his warning just a second longer? I consider myself lucky, because I still don't know who they were or what they had planned for me that night.